Welcome, and a special welcome to students of Matthew Fox who are attending a CIC webinar for the very first time. We hope you return, both to these webinars and to get involved with our mother community, which is Creation Spirituality Communities. Creation in Crisis webinars are a monthly offering on the first Thursday of each month, presenting over time an integrated path of engagement with today's critical issues of environmental degradation. Our speakers address this crisis in creation through their experiences with environmental law, earth activism, deep involvement with a particular issue, research, spirituality, science, cosmology, community organizing, and the arts. We need varieties of involvement for a fuller, stronger response to the dire situation we are facing and how positive people are responding to it. We invite you to find out more about Creation in Crisis and Creation Spirituality Communities by checking our website, which is very easy to remember, www.cscommunities.org. Easy. And on there, there's a page for Creation in Crisis. Also, each organization has a Facebook page. We'd be glad to see you there as well. Today, we are very pleased to be hearing from Reverend Dr. Matthew Fox, PhD, on the challenges of today, Day of Epiphany, Day of Infamy. My name is Reverend Gail Sophia Ransom, D-Min, and I am one of the co-hosts of Creation in Crisis. I am a minister, musician, and community organizer, and I have a D-Min in Creation Spirituality, having led many Creation Spirituality-based gatherings. My co-host is Reverend Penny Andrews, D-Min. You'll hear from her next. A thought leader, chaplain, and interfaith minister. She's a facilitator for Joanna Macy's Work That Reconnects, a meditation coordinator, a deep time network, and permaculturist. She is a member of the board of Creation Spirituality Communities and a spiritual companion with the CS Worldview. Our tech team member is Bob Eisenberger, who has a MES, which is a Master of Environmental Studies from York University. Bob is a ritualist, community organizer, and retired consultant. He has been a student of Creation Spirituality since the mid-1990s and is a member of and part of the leadership team for Ruach, an eco-centered spirituality community in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. So Bob is going to give us some instructions next on how to participate in this webinar.
Thanks, Gail. Just two very quick pieces of business as we get started. We have limited the chat function just because we wanted to kind of reduce traffic with this number of people on board. We're delighted to have so many with us today. The other item you'll want to know, at the end of Matt's talk, we're going to have some time for Q&A. And the way we're going to manage that is by making use of Zoom's raise hand function. If you're not familiar with it, if you look at your Zoom toolbar at the bottom of your screen, you'll see an option for reactions. And if you click that, you'll see 3 rows of choices. One is just some simple icons. The next one is some circular dots that allow you to give some indications, some reactions. The one we're interested in says raise hand. And what that's going to do is bump you to the front of the screen and create a list for us to manage. And then I will call on individuals. Yes, Mary Antonia Riley has found it. And when we're done with your question, then I'll ask you to lower your hand, please. Thanks for that demo. And so that's all I need to say about this. And I'm going to turn it over then to Penny.
Well, thank you all for joining us today. We're very excited for Matt's words on such an important moment in our history, as well as our religious traditions. The Reverend Dr. Matthew Fox holds a doctorate in spirituality from the Institut Catholique de Paris and has authored more than 40 books on spirituality and contemporary culture, Fox has devoted his life work to developing and teaching the tradition of creation spirituality, and in so doing, Matt has invented new forms of education and worship. His work is inclusive of today's science and world spiritual traditions, and he has awakened millions to the much neglected earth-based mystical tradition of the West. Matt founded University of Creation Spirituality in Oakland, California, and was president there from 1996 to 2005. He speaks regularly at professional and community gatherings around the world and has led a renewal of liturgical forms with the Cosmic Mass. Today, he'll be speaking on the Day of Infamy, Day of Epiphany. Thank you and welcome, Matt.
Thank you, Penny. Am I unmuted? Can you hear me? Good. So thank you, Penny and Bob and Gail and all those at Creation Spirituality Communities for the excellent work you've been doing all these years in this this Thursday event that you have, first Thursday of the month. Seems very important, especially the theme you've chosen, and your other work that's coming up, the school that you're soon to launch. So yes, I'm speaking today about, of course, January 6th, Day of Epiphany and Day of Infamy. The Epiphany was always one of my favorite feast days when I was younger. And I was younger for a while. And it's very, very rich. Pardon me? It's very, very rich with stories and invitations to open our hearts up and our imaginations. So I'm going to speak about the two sides to Epiphany and January 6th, 2021. And we'll begin with the bright side, the good news first. And we want to begin with a song by Hildegard. It's a short song, but a beautiful one, because it's like all of her work, it's cosmic, and it's about the love that permeates the universe. She writes, I'll give you the English because she wrote her song in Latin. Love abounds in everything. From the depths of the earth, exulting and excelling over every star, through every star. And most beloved of all, to the highest king, the kiss of peace love gives. So let's just listen to Hildegard and bring in her sense of the cosmic love that holds all things together. This is sung by the Vajra Voices, a group that sing Hildegard's music and other wonderful music. Maybe you don't have it, Bob. Is something amiss with our technology?
Dear.
Caritas abundat.
Sorry, something got reset in the process. Let me start it again.
Thank you, Hildegard. Thank you, Bob. So Epiphany is a story of following a star, a day of following a star, a light in the heavens, in search of good news. I see the Epiphany as kind of the feast day of spiritual seekers. And of course, the Magi, these supposed three men from the East, were not Jews and were not Christians. So this is very much a celebration of deep ecumenism, of how all human beings are seeking, are spiritual seekers. And especially this time in history, when many people are feeling that the institutional religions are not leading us to where we need to go today. So irrespective of one's religious background or tradition or belief, we all can gather on a day like this, on this ecumenical journey in search of a star, in search of light, inner light and outer light. So the word epiphany means manifestation, showing, revelation, unveiling. And of course, another dimension to Epiphany 2022 is the launching of the Webb telescope on Christmas Day 2021. And of course, Epiphany rounds out the Christmas season, the 12 days of Christmas. That is the traditional understanding of Christmas. It's not just one day, but it's a 12-day period. And the launching of the Webb telescope on Christmas was an accident. It was not planned. First of all, it was years late, then it was months late, then it was weeks late, and then it was one day late. They were going to launch it on Christmas Eve, but the wind was too strong, etc. So they launched it on Christmas, and as far as we know, it's doing very well. Last I heard, they've gone through 75% of the most dangerous unfolding of the various equipment. This very complex project that that they had to do. So we're 75% of the way there, at least by now. And of course, it was a gathering of scientists from 29 nations. That's a lot of nations. That's ecumenical. That's cooperation. Who created this amazing instrument to take us into space, back to time, back to the history of light, 4 billion years earlier than the light that Hubble telescope was able to give us. So humanity is going to be learning more and more about our origins. By our origins, I mean the origins of the universe and the earth and all the creatures that have and are inhabiting the earth, wonderful creatures, ourselves included. So this is a stargazing moment, really, in a 21st century context that in some ways parallels, or at least is analogous to the journey of the Magi on this, that's celebrated on this day when they supposedly arrived and saw a new king. So cooperation is part of this day. Curiosity is certainly part of this day, whether we're talking the original Epiphany or today's telescope, and an eagerness to know our origins and how best to live on this earth. So it's also an exploring of Father Sky. And I think that's a very important dimension to the times in which we're living, because the shadow side of this day, which we'll be getting to later, I think has everything to do with a perverted sense of masculinity, or if you will, with a history of patriarchy coming to a very crescendo in our time with the rise of authoritarianism and fascism, which are distorted understandings of the masculine. Now, just last night, I received in my email a poem by a friend of mine. Raphael Jesus. And it's so fitting for today, Rafael Jesus Gonzalez, that I wanted to share it with you. And he gave me permission some time ago to share his poems. So it's a poem about Epiphany called Manifestation. We were surprised by the place to which the star brought us. So little worthy of a king's birth, but our calculations left no doubt. A stable redolent of hay and dung, inhabited by an ox and a donkey, occasioned by lambs and kids. The child, like all newborn, had nothing to distinguish him. The little woman, like all good mother, sweet and tender. The man, no longer young, showed tenderness and solicitude. They were even more surprised and perplexed by our visit than we for being there. We left the gifts we had brought from so far, the little gold coffer chased with lions and suns, the ivory box filled with incense, the ebony urn filled with myrrh, and we left in silence. Finally, the youngest of us murmured, "Perhaps he brings revolution. Perhaps he brings revolution." The other two kept in silence, the hope his saying awoke. Beautiful poem and very fitting for what I want to talk about and for this occasion. Now, I'd like to show you a painting by Hildegard. Can we put up the painting, please? This is one of her visions. And I call it the Man in Sapphire Blue. There you go, thank you. And I invite you to meditate on it. Hildegard stresses this painting as being a painting of the Trinity. But of course, at its center is a man in sapphire blue. And this, she says, is the healing Christ, the blue man, therefore, that's in all of us, in all people. And you'll notice the aperture over his head, which is so interesting because for me, that means the seventh chakra, the completion of our spiritual energy as it rises in Kundalini form up our spine, goes out. It's not contained, but it goes out into the world. And notice his hands are in that position of compassion. If you yourself do that, take your hands at your side and then bring them up like that, put them out like that. What that is a marvelous bodily action of compassion, bringing compassion to the fore, because compassion is bringing your heart energy into your hands so your hands can serve the world. And that's what she has there. Now, if you look very closely, the left knee of the blue man there is bent. See it? The left knee, the right knee as you look at it, but the man's left knee is bent. What does that mean? To me, that means he's acting. He's in action. He's running. There's wonderful teaching in Meister Eckhart. He says, run into peace. He says, everything runs to peace and runs into peace. He says, the heavens are running. And another word for running, I think, today is evolution. It's all moving. But that the human has a choice to just stand there and withdraw or allow one to get distracted or get obsessed by something, addicted to something. But this man is free. He's free to run into peace, into making peace, into sharing compassion. So there's this action in this picture, this painting by 12th century spiritual genius Hildegard of Bingen, and the grandmother of the Rhineland mystic movement, the creation spirituality movement in Europe. Now, the golden ropes are very important. That is her description of divinity, the Father God, the Creator God, the Father, Mother God. And she says that all of creation is bound together by these ropes. And this is what allows things to happen. So let me share with you how she puts that, because in her words, this is especially significant. She talks about the Creator as a living light, and the sun as a flash of light, and the Spirit as fire. So all that she's depicting here. And the Spirit is the round white mandala around the golden mandala. So those are the three persons: the cosmic Christ, the blue man, the golden ropes are holding creation together. The web of creation she talks about. She talked about that 800 years before today's ecologists do. And but she's also talking about fire and light and the web of the universe and the web of creation. And she says, foolishness is lacking motherly compassion. Whoever lacks this dies of thirst. And she says her vision was a most quiet light, and in it burning with flashing fire, the form of a man in sapphire blue. A man in sapphire blue. That is the healing Christ in all of us. And she says, I, wisdom, bind together heavenly and earthly things as a unity for the good of the people. And so you should handle and cleanse the wounds of those who are sick. You should maintain the innocent and righteous. And with God's help, let your heart rejoice with the one as much as the other. So compassion is about action for her. And she says, I am flooded through with inner compassion. Nothing, neither gold nor money, costly stones nor pearls, can hide from me the eyes of the poor who weep because they lack life's necessities. So there's a lot in this painting, including the invitation that we become other Christs. And of course, it's a mandala. In fact, it's at least two mandalas. And a mandala is often described as a psychocosmogram that heals and that brings the one and the many together. And this is what compassion does. And she says, the compassion of the grace of God will make humans light up like the sun, make us light up like the sun. So all this is a good news of Epiphany, the manifestation, the showing of the Christ child who would grow into a teacher of compassion and invite everyone else to follow that path. So this is the teaching of Hildegard about the ropes of the universe. And of course, where Eckhart says, compassion is where peace and justice kiss. Compassion is also where the masculine and the feminine kiss, because mysticism is that feminine quality we all have, women and men, of receptivity, of receiving, of taking in the beauty of our existence, the fact of our existence, the miracle of our existence. And prophecy is that masculine energy of standing up to oppression and the lack of compassion, standing up to cold-heartedness. And so when Eckhart says, quoting from the psalmist, compassion is where peace and justice kiss, we can also say compassion is where the mystic and the prophet kiss, and where the divine feminine and the sacred masculine kiss. So the revolution that the poet Rafael Jesus Gonzalez talks about Jesus bringing is, I think, a revolution of looking differently at humanity's role, that there's something much more powerful going on in the world and in history and in all of us than just the grabbing for power, that there's a new vision in town. And it's a vision found in Judaism, and it's a vision found in all the great spiritual traditions, but it can get covered up. It can get covered up by history. It can get covered up by politics. It can get covered up by bad theology. And so now we turn to the second side to this day of Epiphany, January 6th, 2022. And can we let this picture go now, please? So, of course, the second side to the original Epiphany story is the Feast of the Innocents. That is to say that a tyrannical political leader and his family named Herod haunted the first century of the Christian era, the time when Jesus lived and those who wrote about him lived, because the entire Christian gospel or Bible was written in the first century. It was essentially finished around the year 100 with John's gospel. Now, I want to point out a book to you on the Herods. It came out this year, The Herods, Murder, Politics, and Art of Succession, by Bruce Chilton, one of the great New Testament scholars of our time. And I'm happy to say a friend of mine. And it's a really powerful book because it really fills in a lot of the politics of the era of Jesus and the era after he died, during which time the Gospels and epistles were written. Let me just read a short paragraph about that summarizes this book, because just as in our time, any search for the light encounters human brilliance. Doxa here, this painting by M.C. Richards, who was on our faculty for years. I love it. It's so simple. It's the angel announcing doxa, which is glory, to the shepherds. And that's of course, the story of Christmas and Epiphany. But here is just a summary of what Bruce Chilton is telling us in this very well-researched book on the politics of Jesus' time before, during, and after he died. Herod inherited the twin pillars of loyalty to Judaism. Herod was a Jew, and loyalty to Rome that became the basis of Herodian rule. And his dynasty covered the whole first century, and of course, part of the century before of the first century. He elevated Antipater's opportunism to a political art. During Herod's time, Roman power took its imperial form, and Octavian was responsible for making Herod king of Judea. As Octavian ruled, he took the title Augustus, in keeping with his devotion to his adoptive father cult of the divine Julius. Imperial power was a theocratic assertion, as well as a dominant military, economic, and political force. Imperial power was a theocratic assertion. See, there is a theology behind the Roman Empire of Jesus' day, as well as a dominant military, economic, and political force. Finally, Herod framed a version of theocratic ambition all his own, theocratic ambition, deliberately crafting a dynastic claim grounded in Roman might and Israelite theocracy. So he combined his inherited religious worldview with his role as the emperor's representative in Judea. That unlikely hybrid was a key to the Herodian surprising longevity and power during the most chaotic century in the political history of Judaism. The most chaotic century in the political history of Judaism. That's saying a lot. That's saying a lot. And this is a world in which Jesus lived. And when he starts talking about the kingdom of God being this and not that, and when his followers start talking about him as Filios Dei, son of God, all that is radically political, because the emperor was called the Son of God by the Romans, and not only called, but was worshipped. There were rituals around that, etc. And there was a real strong army to enforce that belief, that doctrine. So part of the Epiphany story is about the shadow side of human history. And of course, one of the stories is that the Magi stopped off to meet with the political leader of the time. And he was very interested in this. Oh, a new king of the Jews. Needless to say, he was threatened. And so he sent out this edict that any boy child under 2 should be murdered. Now that's kind of believable. That's kind of typical of emperors and tyrannical leaders, which he was. So his family too was when he died and so forth, and he passed on this kind of energy to his children. So there is a hint here of the shadow that would pursue this boy king that the Magi found in a manger later in his life. The powers of the empire obviously eventually caught up with Jesus about the age of 30 and cut his life short. So this story of the Magi and Epiphany and so forth, it's obviously a mixed story. On the one hand, there is hope and light and a new star and epicumenism, the coming together of Jews and non-Jews alike. On the other hand, there is evil. And this was true in Jesus' day, and it's certainly true in ours. In our day, as we know, an insurrection occurred 1 year ago today. That was an incendiary moment in the history of our country, and indeed in the history of democracy. A coup attempt. And it was not a one-day event. We're now learning more and more of the facts about the meetings that went on months before January 6th. Meetings with lawyers and politicians and the rest, some of them holding political office still, to plan how to undo the votes of 80 million Americans. It was a coup attempt. And the lying that began even before the election from one of the presidential candidates, that this election is already fixed and so forth, this set people up for the lying that would precede after the counting of the votes, and right up to today, when, as we all know, there are laws being passed in many states, I think it's now 40 states, that essentially are limiting the right of voting to lots of people, especially minorities and poor people and young people. And of course, the purpose of January 6th was to interrupt the counting of electors for the President of the United States, which usually is just a ritualistic happening. But in this day, it was anything but merely ritualistic. As we all know, over 200 police officers were wounded. 5 died from it, some of them by suicide. Many others have profound physical, mental, psychological, emotional problems because of it. And close to 200 Congress people actually voted against passing the electoral votes for the new president. And many have been carrying on a propaganda war ever since. And I do think that one way to name the instigator of this is that Mr. Trump is the worst loser in history, at least in the history of democracy. It's too bad he never learned to lose, but of course, he was a very wounded person, is a very wounded person. His father was a member of the Ku Klux Klan, after all. And his niece has told us a lot about the dynamics of that particular family clan that are not at all healthy. She, to her credit, she went and studied psychology first to figure out what made her what she was, then to figure out what made her uncle what he is. And a lot of it she credits to her grandfather and the president's father. So I think even within that scope of that particular family, not unlike the Herod family, but that particular family, that we're talking about a debilitating manhood, about a perverse notion of what a man is, and therefore what half of humanity is. And the fact that this man's father was in the Ku Klux Klan, needs to be talked about. It's significant. I sure wouldn't have liked my father to be in the Ku Klux Klan. I think I'd be a very different person from what I am today. And I'm not a perfect person, but at least I'm not championing white supremacy. And, we should be talking about where that comes from. And because the events we've all lived through, the Charleston event and the rest, points to a very peculiar version of manhood, as does, of course, the rise of authoritarianism, not only in America today, but in so many countries in the West. Of course, Hungary has been taken over by it. And just the other day, this ex-president of ours praised the president of Hungary, who is an out of the closet fascist. And of course, he also praises the president of Brazil, who's been trying to pull off a dictatorial authoritarian movement in Brazil. So I see the crisis in American democracy as a morality play around one version of masculinity. The version that patriarchy has been building up for centuries. I see it as a real crisis in patriarchy. It involves many politicians before Trump, during Trump, and post-Trump presidency. It involves truth versus falsity, lying versus honesty, carrying on of lies and the big lie have poisoned the body politic of America. Of course it has. You cannot build a democracy on lies. Now, no one lives life without some dishonesty or lies, but it's about pouring it into the bloodstream of the body politic that creates a really scary shadow, such as we're experiencing today, where we have these stories, all of them true, about people who counting votes being attacked at their homes, getting messages that they're going to be killed and strangled, their children will be killed, et cetera, et cetera. This is actually going on. It's the rise of the shadow side of humanity. And this happens when mendacity gets elevated and of course spread thanks to new technology and social media. And of course it involves giant media conglomerates and I won't mention Rupert Murdoch by name, but these powers of our time, all it takes is to be a billionaire, I guess, to buy a empire of that can reach billions of people, and you can pour anything you want into it, it seems. As many lies as you want. Lies about photo fraud, for example. And then, of course, the lie that is denial. The denial of climate change is racing through, coursing through the veins of the social media and of major broadcasting companies. And lies about racism not having been part of American history from the get-go, when so many of the founders of our country actually held slaves at the time. And much of these truths were not taught in history for years in our civics classes either. And now that some are demanding they be taught, there's a whole movement to shut that down and say, no, that will disturb our children. This is part of the movement of our time. And of course, lies about economic inequality in America. And because so many of these media are owned by very wealthy individuals, these lies get covered up. The truth gets covered up again. It's denial about the amazing gulf between the have and have-nots today that is greater than even the time of the 1920s. And then the cover up in the church about the discovery doctrine, which was created in the 15th century, late 15th century, by two popes, three documents, two popes, and which said in essence that it's okay for a Christian king to go to a foreign land like Africa, and then it was adapted, this new thing discovered in 1492, or I shouldn't say discovered. Columbus didn't discover America. He was lost and stumbled on it. Anyway, the doctrine that came out of the Vatican at that time, the doctrine of discovery, is that because these people aren't Christian, you have a right to take things from them. For example, slaves. That was put into practice a century later. And of course, take the silver and the gold out of South America, and so forth. So that too has to be talked about. It cannot be covered up. And the violence and the power for power's sake. So this is all what I mean by a day of infamy today, that this is not an isolated day. This is a history, part of our evolution. And therefore, it's an opportunity to wake up and to break out of this cycle of patriarchy and violence and empire building that found its manifestation on this day, Epiphany, the manifestation day, at the moment of counting electoral votes, with an insurrection that desecrated the national capital. So in many ways, I see today's crisis of authoritarianism and fascism as a crisis in masculinity. The reptilian brain taken to its logical conclusion, fully on display in our living rooms, on TV, manifesting on Epiphany Day, the raw reptilian energy which says, I win, you lose, which is the price of untruth. It is a clash between masculine values, so-called, under patriarchy defined, and values of wisdom, not just power, values of contemplation, not just planning to control, values of compassion instead of raw power, and the value found therefore in virtue itself. Thomas Aquinas says, with virtue, humans participate in the divine power. With virtue, humans participate in the divine power. That's what virtue is. You cannot have a democracy without virtue. It has to be a value and taught as a value. Now, obviously, January 6th is also full of virtue. The police who held their ground or tried to, and some of them died from it, and many of them, hundreds, are still wounded by it. But that's virtue, and it's about strength. The word virtue is about strength. It comes from the word for man. Vir is a word for man. And this is an old teaching. Hildegard of Bingen says, a brave warrior overcomes evil with combative prowess. Prepare yourself for spiritual warfare. She writes that to her nuns. So the prophetic work of standing up takes courage, and it is a masculine energy. It's the animus in us, if you will, that is part of both women and men. She wrote to monks, prepare your hearts to do battle and give good example. Throw off your concern for matters which are unimportant and be zealous that you stand with the divine who is the Alpha and Omega. Raise yourself up from your sins so the virtues will gloriously take on form in you. She says to a lay person, she writes, be a strong warrior, nobly clothed with the magnificent armor of a true Solomon. You must be manly in your power and strength and untiring in your struggle. And to the prelates of Mentz, the strength of God's justice is at work and shows itself as a warrior against injustice until that injustice lies conquered on the ground, a warrior against injustice. She writes to another, you say, I am not able to do good works. And I will respond, you are able. And you reply, I do not agree. And I reply, learn to fight against yourself. Christ is a very strong warrior. Perform the works of justice and holiness. She talks about the power of virtue. Persevere in the battle. Be a strong warrior against injustice. And if you look up the word virtue in Webster's dictionary, which I really encourage you to do, its synonyms for virtue are manliness, virility, strength, and so forth. So even in our English language, this teaching from the great mystics of old, Aquinas and Hildegard, are two whom I've just quoted, are played out even in our language to this day. So a healthy masculine energy, unlike patriarchal version of masculinity, is about virtue. And it includes the virtue of courage, of course, like we saw on January 6th, along with the vice of hatred and wanting to disrupt the Democratic Act and to hang a vice president and to kill legislators and all the rest. Now, let's show Hildegard's painting. Second painting, please.
Mhm.
Here, Hildegard painted in the 12th century, I believe, the most stark and unsubtle, but deep critique of patriarchy I have ever seen. This is patriarchy, according to Hildegard. Upper left-hand corner. She talks about, there are four animals there. There's a wild horse and a lion and a wild dog and a bear. And what do? They all have rope, and it's one rope, she points out, in their mouth. They're undoing the ropes of the universe. Remember the ropes that we had with the first painting from her? These forces, which are within all of us, we're all capable of carrying. And she goes on in detail about how the bear acts in the lion and the dog in this particular negative scene. But the bottom line is, and of course she talks about this as the Antichrist, the tearing apart of the webs of the web of creation and the web of the universe. And then let me share with you a few of the phrases that she uses here. She says, the reddish lion stands for warlike men who wage wars without considering God's judgment. The pale horse stands for those who put luxury living and their own selfish pleasure before the performance of worthwhile acts. The black pig, excuse me, that was a pig, not a bear, stands for rulers who create sadness and uncleanness in themselves and the subject. The wolf, it's a wolf, not a dog, well, they're related, stands for those who rob others. The black rope, she tells us, represents the darkness that stretches out many injustices. And so it is an undoing of the ropes of the universe, the ropes of society that keep us together. And of course, the ropes of ecology too, because she had a lot to say about the destruction of the web of creation. Up in the right-hand corner, the Son of Man is the beginning of justice, who watches over the strength of the union of our mere knowledge and our human work. Christ is a cornerstone that was rejected and is now elevated. So you see he's at the corner of two walls there. And he reveals a shining of justice and the righteousness of those who are devoted. And then she carries on about the bottom left-hand corner, the bottom picture is, of course, very stark. And you don't have to be a Freudian to understand what she's saying. She was not a Freudian. She wrote 700 years before Freud. But she is saying that masculinity is out of control here. And she actually, in that big picture at the bottom, you'll notice now the phallus is extending itself in Mother Church, because that picture of the womanly embodiment there is it's a woman, it's Sophia, it's Mother Church. And the black item on the right, she actually calls the human dung. She says, monstrous ugliness that spreads a foul stench on the mountain, tears the institution of the church to pieces with the crudest greediness. This is the Antichrist, the son of injustice, the cursed one of the cursed ones. And it happens because faith staggers in people and the gospel limps in some people. The divine scriptures have been rendered lukewarm, she writes. The monster, she speaks to the monster, oh, you cave of injustice, your works seek the pit of hell. You will lie absorbed in your gluttony there, and that hellish place will vomit forth stink. The world will recognize in the stench the bitterness of death in the destroyer of destructions. You are the worst of beasts. And she applies it to the politicians of her time. You can see that Dante picked up on this 100 years later, after Hildegard. But this is graphic stuff. And she's experienced the encounter, the negative encounter, the shadow with patriarchy. And she's putting it out there. So to name it, because if you don't name it, as James Baldwin said, there's no hope of resolving things. So I think that in this phallic representation of the dark side of patriarchal history, Hildegard is naming for us today something very, very primal. Because I do see the January 6th insurrection, which is still going on and which began long before January 6th, as a final moment, hopefully, in the history of patriarchy, history of empire building, and all that's taken, and all the denial that's taken, and all the lives it's taken, and today, all the creation that it's taking, the matricide, the killing of Mother Earth that is going on. I think all this is pictured in Hildegard's vision here. Now, with Christ, she invokes Elijah, and that's why he has two fingers up there. That is not the peace symbol, although you can relate it to if you want to, but she says it stands for Enoch and Elijah. And traditionally, they are a symbol of the prophets. Elijah stands for John the Baptist, a precursor of Christ. And Christ, this is what she says, Christ is a very strong warrior, and he will break the head of injustice, and Enoch and Elijah will accompany him. So that is her painting, I think, of what's going on today of patriarchy. Thank you. We can put the picture down now. So when it comes to running into peace, as we saw in the blue painting, Thomas Aquinas says, it is a great thing to do miracles, but it is a greater thing to live virtuously. I just love that sentence. It's so mind-blowing. Well, you could go do miracles, go and do some miracles. But living a virtuous life is greater than a miracle. Or to put it differently, it is a miracle. And this is what is at the heart, I think, of Jesus' presence among us. But the Beatitudes represent, and of course, Gandhi took a non-Christian to figure out, to translate that into nonviolent action, figure it out. And what he accomplished through nonviolent action, what Mandela accomplished through nonviolent action, what King accomplished through nonviolent action, these are marvelous examples. What Bishop Tutu accomplished, these are marvelous examples of the sacred masculine at work and of healthy masculinity. And I think that our founding fathers, for all their foibles and mistakes, and especially some of them regarding slavery, but not all, nevertheless, they tried to create a system, a government, a way of government that in the long run, because they said all men are created equal, but they didn't include women and they didn't include men from Africa, but at least the words are there. It's an unfinished vision. And so at least they were trying to tame the reptilian brain of European history, where kings were doing crazy things and crazy kings were doing crazy things, literally, to exploit other people. Just as today, we're doing crazy things, exploiting Mother Earth, her creatures, her oceans, her forests, her soil, and so many other species. So every generation has to wake up to the call of justice and compassion that people like Jesus put forward. And so the invitation that I see on a day like this is an invitation to put honesty before lies, to put love before fear, to put compassion before cold-heartedness and not caring, and remembering that compassion is very much a feminine word because it means in its original Hebrew and Arabic wording, it means the womb, because in the womb is where interconnectivity is especially pronounced. And that's the essence of compassion. And of putting wisdom before raw knowledge and raw power. So wisdom and compassion are explicitly feminine, so that the healthy masculine combines the feminine values and the masculine values. And so as we send the Webb telescope into the sky in search of the stars, and in a way it's becoming kind of a satellite star for ourselves, but it will instruct us in about our origins. We are entering again the field of Father Sky, a very important archetype for redeeming the sacred masculine, from moving from patriarchal versions of masculinity, such as Hildegard painted in that stunning painting, to Father Sky, to the blue man, to the green man, who is a spiritual warrior defending Mother Earth, to the hunter-gatherer. And clearly we're hunting and gathering through Webb telescope the truth of our origins, insofar as science can tell us that. And science has its limits. Science cannot tell us the meaning of these stories. That is the role of the religious imagination. And so here we have a very hopeful, I think, medicine for the times in which we find ourselves. Now, in closing, if I can find it, I had some note to myself here. Yeah. I see this revolution that Rafael Jesus Gonzalez named as a revolution of deconstructing patriarchy, which has been the Egypt of our souls for centuries, our slavery, the enslavement of our souls, deconstructing patriarchy and replacing it with the healthy and sacred masculine in tune with the healthy feminine. The latter, the feminine, will include wisdom, compassion, eros, love of life, contemplation, and chaos, the ability to dance and get along with chaos, and of course, the mystic in all of us. All that I would recognize as feminine values. And of course, Gaia, Mother Earth. And that tuned to Father Sky, the blue man, compassion and creativity. The green man, defending Mother Earth, the spiritual warrior and prophet, saying no to forces of destruction. The hunter-gatherer, healthy fatherhood and parenting, and grandfatherhood, eldership and caring. I see that as the news from the manger of 2,000 years ago, where the spiritual seekers of that day, the Magi, found not only a star, but maybe a baby who would, in Rafael Jesus Gonzalez's words, create a revolution, not of power against power, but of evolution, the next stage of evolution of humanity, that we are capable of compassion, just as he taught in his manhood, be you compassionate as your creator in heaven is compassionate. Thank you. Those are my words. January 6th, 2022.
Marvelous. Thank you so much, Matt. We all appreciate your eloquent words of wisdom and your sharing. Now is our time for some questions and answers. As a reminder, if you have a question, please click on the reactions button on your Zoom toolbar, and under there, look for the words that say raise hand. And Marjo Grogan is already starting his love. So Marjo, if you want to unmute yourself and ask Matt your question.
Yes, I think that's me, Mary Jo Grogan.
Oh, Mary Jo, I'm sorry.
Hello. And
Hello.
thank you for always showing us the way toward the prophetic tradition in the West. I feel emotional seeing you and hearing you today. And I wonder if you could speak to some of the symbols that we see the white supremacists carrying that take us back to the Christian crusaders of the Middle Ages, that represent in their minds somehow some sense of masculine superiority, that maybe the West conquered the Middle East way back during the Crusades, which we know is not necessarily the case, and compare or contrast that to the quest for the Holy Grail, the spiritual legacy that we have in the West over thousands of years, and how the Grail itself, if we see it as a symbol of wholeness, of Gaia, of healing, that the Western knight cannot reach the Grail castle unless he goes with his brother from the Middle East, unless he goes with his half brother who's half black and half white. And I just think the story is so important for us to know in the West today, that this warfare that we've been carrying on with the third world, with the Middle East, and this need to be superior, really is in our spiritual literature. There is the response to that. I'm sorry, I hope I didn't go on too long. Thank you again.
Well, I agree with you that these symbols, humanity needs symbols, and whether you're white supremacist or a liberated human being seeking liberation of others, we call on symbols, and because symbols touch us deeply, more deeply than just stopping with the brain, the left brain, especially with ideas. And so I would just, support what you're saying about how important the symbols are. And of course, there's a whole history of symbology here. For example, the symbol of the cross in Christianity. This keeps coming up all the time, but in fact, it was not a symbol in Christianity until the 4th century. The 4th century is when Christianity married the empire. And Christianity took on some of the attitudes of anyone involved with the empire, like Herod, that we will tell you what to do kind of a thing. And that's when so much was damaged, I think. I call it the big detour with when the emperor became Christian, and then the empire became Christian. And often, not always, but often, those who were pagans were badly treated, and the rest. So when you get that power, it tends to drive us crazy. And again, I go back to that reptilian brain, because I see reptiles as win-lose. You don't, with a crocodile, there's not a lot of middle ground. It's a win-lose situation with a crocodile. And it's I win and you lose. And that attitude, it plays out. Now, so the question becomes, how do we calm that most ancient of brains in us, 420 million years old in all of us, so that the other two brains, our compassionate mammal brain, which is half as old, 210 million years old, can flourish. Because this is what not only Jesus, but Buddha, Lao Tzu, Isaiah, Muhammad, we're all trying to call us to, and Black Elk, our capacity for compassion. Why is it so hard for humans to be compassionate? Well, I think it's because the reptilian brain is real strong, real old, and runs away with us unless we take stock and do something about it. And this is what meditation does, I think. It calms the reptilian brain, because reptiles are not good at bonding, but they're very good at lying alone in the sun. That's solitude, and that's what we receive from meditation. Meditation is a capacity, among other things, to live in solitude, to be solitudinous at times, to be still, as the psalmist says, be still and learn that I am God. So that's a big part of survival today, is that we have practices to calm the reptilian brain. But that's not the only one we have. Meditation is very important. And of course, art is meditation. So creativity is another way to gather our energies, which can be used for good or for evil, and focus them, and thereby put our values into practice. But another way to calm the reptilian brain is sports. And I think, I don't know any human culture that hasn't had sports. And I think sports are absolute genius ideas. Now, I'm not talking about the sports that crazy billionaires own, although there's a remnant there, certainly, of what I'm going to talk about. But what do sports do for us? Take a basketball game. You've got a court, a limited area. You've got umpires, you've got rules, you've got a time clock. Okay. So you've got all these things going, but then you say to the players, different teams, and the people in the stands, follow these rules and then let your reptilian brain go. Try to win. You be the winners. And whether it's tennis or basketball or football or basketball or baseball, what have you, that's what we do. And we put all this energy into it. And people in the stands go crazy. And if their team loses, they're depressed for 20 hours. And if they win, they're cheery for 20 hours. So I think it's an act of genius to turn this reptilian energy into a game, but a game with rules, a serious game, if you will. I mean, in some cultures centuries ago, it was so serious that you lost your life if your team lost. So, I think we've gotten a little better than that, made a little progress. But my point is, I think that we can easily underestimate the the importance of games and of sports, to play that with the reptilian brain. And I try to stand back from that and say, what geniuses in our DNA centuries and centuries ago invented this concept that we're so creative, we can play with the reptilian brain. And so I think the issue of the reptilian brain is a survival issue today. And with it, the issue of masculine and feminine energies. If we can turn our war responses, which is reptilian brain unleashed, into games and refereed with rules, and there people don't die at the end, there is a great attraction in that. I think we should be thinking more about that too, as well as obviously teaching, beginning when people are young, children, how to calm the reptilian brain through practices, whether it be yoga or running, and realize that so many practices can be approached as means to calm the reptilian brain, not just as feeling better or looking better or overcoming stress. There's something deeper that we're invited to do, I think, in spiritual practices. And not just feeling righteous and clean before God. No, there's something much deeper than that goes on. And then, of course, rituals, ceremonies, so needed today. Because as Melodome Some, who died just a month ago, this ritual leader from Africa used to say that men who have not had a real ritual of rite of passage, when they grow up, will be angry. And there's a lot of that going around. And a lot of these people who invaded the Capitol were in that kind of state. And that's just proof that we don't have rites of passage in our culture that are really working. And look at what percentage of the people who go around shooting innocent people in schools and churches and malls and theaters, how many of them are young men who've not had rites of passage? So, when you become a man or a woman, but I think women are better at this because they have a natural rite of passage with menstruation every month. But with men, we have to be conscious of the need. The society, our elders have to be conscious of the need to put young men through adventures, really, through challenging rites of passage that where we face death, and where we face, therefore, our own capacity for strength, inner strength. So I think all of these are part of the symbology that we need today in the 21st century. And clearly, in the past, there have been symbols that have not served others well. And remember, the first symbols in Christianity, like I said, were not the cross. They were the Good Shepherd and fish, the two fish, the fish of the age of Pisces, a new age, and the two fish swimming in opposite directions. But it was the age of Pisces. It's so interesting that Jesus' life and death, the first century, corresponds with the end of the age of the ram, and the beginning of the age of Pisces. So the early Christians were into this understanding of history. And they understood Jesus' death on the cross as the last lamb slain in the age of the ram. And that the new thing was this age of Pisces, which was about fish and water and fishermen. I will make you fishers of men. And many of his early followers were fishermen, et cetera, et cetera. So I think there's a real symbolism there to become more aware of. And that the cross, is two things. It can be like that, but turned on its side, it becomes a sword. And I think in many ways, Constantine did that. Because if you're going to run an empire, you need lots of swords and lots of weapons and lots of military budgets and all the rest. Imagine if humanity could let go of the empire syndrome, how all that money we're putting into weapons could go towards schools or hospitals or research on the upcoming viruses, et cetera, or of course on changing our diets and saving Mother Earth that way. and planting trees. So, you know, the symbols represent something very big. So thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. You addressed quite a few things. And one of them was the brain. And I guess the short version of my question is that it takes the whole brain and the evolving brain, having experienced post-traumatic stress disorder, brain retraining 18 years ago now, when they were just really working with it. Pulling out of the reptilian brain was a process of going through all the brains. I think it's really clear at this point in time. Yesterday, there was an article that more than 40% of the people on the planet experienced climate disaster in the past year. We are a traumatized people, and the trauma is continuing not only with climate, but with the virus, clearly, and they're probably all linked. How and where do you see the most fruitful work going on right now to help us all pull out of the reptilian brain? The mammalian brain is not far enough, because that takes us to survival at all costs. Watch a mother. What do you see as the cutting edge, most helpful work we can do to go whole brain beyond?
Go whole brain. I like that. Well, to go whole brain, also to go whole heart, wholeheartedly. And we have to link the brain to the heart again. And of course, one thing they're finding is the fact there is a brain in the heart. And that's what compassion is, isn't it? And that it's that heart energy, but it's interesting that the heart is in the center of our chakra system. And so it calls down, it calls up what's below, and it calls down, if you will, what's above. So it is a way of centering and utilizing the whole brain, if you will. And of course, whole brain to me very much means paying attention finally to the right hemisphere, which is the intuitive brain, which I call the mystical brain. And this is why I think art as meditation is so important, because, and other forms of meditation, but especially art as meditation, because it's called by the scientists, Aranjo and Ornstein, the way of the prophets. It leads to work, to action. And it's the way that Jesus chose as a parable teacher. He was an artist, clearly. His stories are artful in the most profound way. And he calls us all to be artists, because like Gabriel Marcel, the French philosopher, used to say, it takes an artist not just to make music, but to listen to music. The artist is not just the painter, but the person who enjoys the painting. And so art is also the receiving of beauty as well as the creating of it. And it's a cycle that goes on that way. And Jesus did not choose to be a seminary professor, but he chose to be a parable teller. And of course, he was a carpenter, so he knew the crafts thing. And of course, he was a peasant farmer, so he knew relating to the earth. And you see that, of course, in all of his stories. So I think that's part of the whole brain. And of course, this is why Einstein was so critical of American education. He said, and I quote, "I abhor American education," unquote. Why? Because he said, values do not come from the intellect. And yet the rational mind, he says, does not give us values, it gives us method, but not values. Values come from intuition, he said, or deep feeling, which is the same thing. Those are his words. And I would say, or mysticism, which is the same thing, the right brain. And so I very much criticize American academia. And when I see all these crazy lawyers running around, say, is there no way that, I mean, it's bad enough to see pedophile priests, at least the Catholic Church is beginning to kick them out and send them to society's civil courts and so forth. But I see these lawyers who planned January 6th. Let's make that clear. Lawyers who are still acting lawyers sat down and gave advice to the Steve Bannons of the world and other fascists about how to kill American democracy. And they're running around just fine. And, is law ever going to catch up with these lawyers? So my point is that you look at the entire educational scene, and it takes a virtuous person to go through that system and still have some sense of values or virtues. And it shouldn't be that hard. It should be built into. When I started my Yellow program with inner city teenagers in public school, I knew I couldn't talk about religious values. So I created this new system of values called the 10 C's: cosmology, ecology, chaos, contemplation, compassion, courage, critical thinking, character building, and so forth, ceremony, all that. And then I was able to talk about values in a public school system. And the kids really got into it. And then we had them make movies about any topic they're interested in, but to bring in at least two of those values. Two of the C's, we called it, because that way they were bringing in value and they were learning something. Sure, they wanted to make a movie. One guy wanted to make a movie about muscle cars because he loved muscle cars. Okay, but then he did it. He chose to do it about ecology and muscle cars. It's one of the C's: cosmology, ecology, and he did it about changing your gasoline engine to a vegetable-driven engine. And the last scene of the movie, I'll never forget it, was this race between a gasoline engine muscle car and a vegetarian muscle car. And you can guess which one won the race. This guy was a freshman in high school. He told me 10 years later, that was the most powerful educational experience he's ever had in his life. Well, why? Because we brought the right brain in, the creativity of the right brain with a value system. So my point is that it's sad to see how without values, so many of these big shots are in our culture, wealthy, running media companies and all the rest. And how can they go through so many years of training? I think January 6th of last year was a real report card on education, a report card. We flunked it. We flunked it. And when the reptilian brain wins, that's a bad report card. And I think that's at the heart of what we're talking about. So, yeah, bringing that heart wisdom together with the head wisdom, that's what wisdom is, you see. It's combining knowledge and something bigger, the bigger questions about why we're here and what we want to leave behind and what matters. And that's what values are, isn't it? And so it is that marriage that's been missing because wisdom has been banished from education for centuries, period. And it was banished because it's feminine. Patriarchy took over completely the academic agenda. When the university was invented in the 12th century, Hildegard's century, it meant a place to go to find your place in the universe, because wisdom is always interested in the whole, in cosmology. Now, another area that must be talked about that you've brought up here, but your question, an important question, is joy. The tougher the times we're living in, the more precious joy is, and it must be developed. Aquinas says joy is a human's noblest act. Joy is a human's noblest act. What if he's right? If he's right, then you know you're not here to be a savior. Don't take it all too seriously. If our species runs out, if it goes extinct, it goes extinct. And the odds are that we're headed exactly that direction. I've been meditating a lot lately on how they're discovering all these hominid cousins of ours. You know, we knew about Neanderthal because it's European, and we knew about the denizen because they're kind of Russian and all that. But now in Southeast Asia, they're almost daily, they're finding new versions of hominids, and they have to make up whole new names. So far, what I've learned is they've got about 14 of them. So we have 14 of these ancestors, hominids like us, two-legged, stood on two legs and all this stuff like Neanderthal, but they're all gone. We're the last ones standing. And, you know, that should really come home to us. That's how serious life is on the one hand, but you have to balance that seriousness with our capacity for joy. And I'll tell you this wonderful story. This last week when Bishop Tutu died, I was talking to a friend, wonderful guy, who worked with the Dalai Lama in India. And one event he was at, Bishop Tutu came. So Bishop Tutu and the Dalai Lama did some dialoguing, and then they all went out to dinner, about half a dozen of them, and my friend one of them. And I said, well, what was Bishop Tutu like? He said, and I want to share this with you. He said, never in my life have I experienced someone who was so exuberantly joyful. Exuberantly joyful. Now, this is a man who lived through apartheid, for God's sake. And he's black. He wasn't on the white team. He's black. And he lived through apartheid. And he was threatened with prison and all the rest, but he didn't back down. I mean, a man like that, and there are so many other people. We've mentioned Gandhi and King and so many others, but I'm just mentioning Tutu because of this story. You know, the sacred masculine is possible. These people incarnate it. And he himself tells a story. He became a Christian because when he was a boy, his mother worked in this factory or something. He would join her after school and stay with her until she had to go home, left work. And he said she would sit at this table in the factory, and this white man would walk by every day and greet her and say, hello, Mrs. Tutu, or whatever her last name was. And he said that no white man ever addressed Black women like that in South Africa. No white man ever showed that kind of dignity and respect. And that white man was an Episcopal priest, an Anglican priest. So that's why he joined the Anglican Church and became an Anglican priest, because he had this mentor. And I received a letter, because I mentioned that story in maybe some daily meditations. I received a letter from a woman who knew this man. She grew up in South Africa. And she said he was amazing, just as amazing as Tutu. So he had this mentor. But the fact that the summary of his personality, being in his presence, the word was joy. It wasn't about being a fierce warrior, though he was. The joy was bigger than the battle. And that's how you bring the heart in and the whole brain.
The heart brain. Thank you.
Oops. My apologies.
Matt, this was amazing. And what a wonderful note to wrap this up with, that the heart brain. I'm struck, Thomas Berry talked about the new cosmology as a way of knowing. And I think what you've done with creation spirituality is offered to all of us in this postmodern world a new way of knowing, a new way of holding what is going on today. And it's one that has resilience and joy built into it, as well as dealing with challenges and standing up and being the fire. I'm sorry we won't have time to get to these other questions, but we've gone past time and we have a few more things to attend to. Bob, would you put up the screen? There are some wonderful opportunities to see more of what Matt is up to. One coming up in just a few days. There's a talk on the return of the sacred masculine with Howard Thurman and Martin Luther King focus. And then the Deep Time Network. And if you're not aware of the Deep Time Network, I encourage you to go to their website and learn about them, because in the creation spirituality way of knowing is the universe story. And just as he referenced Hildegard's use of the universe, this is everyone's story. So on March 30th, that'll be a public talk. The information is yet to come out about it, but do go to the Deep Time Network website. And we have the creation spirituality communities, class offerings, Matt's daily meditations, and a very exciting new pathway is some classes that creation spirituality communities are offering. And in the intro to creation spirituality class, Matt will be a guest speaker on February 22nd. So that's another way to connect with Matt, were you to sign up for the intro to creation spirituality class. And also later in this summer, from August to September, he'll be teaching his own course, A Mystic for Your Soul. And do go to the cscommunities.org for more information on all of this. Thank you so much, Matt, for a wonderful talk today. As the afternoon went on, I saw your fire as I used to experience it at UCS. It's beautiful.
Well, thank
Bob?
you.
Okay, thanks, Penny. Oh, yes, let us not forget to pass on gratitude to Karen Clark and the Vajra Voices for the music that we listened to, and which we are going to listen to as soon as I'm done with my announcement. One more piece of Hildegard's work. And do check Karen's website for information on her February workshops. Also want to talk about next month's speaker. We're going to be delighted to bring you Dr. Stephen Bede Sharper, who's a professor at the University of Toronto, an author of multiple books, including his latest, For Earth's Sake, Toward a Compassionate Ecology, which I'm quite looking forward to. I just put a hold on it at the library, and I'm looking forward to delving into that myself. He is a very popular speaker, great sense of humor, very well-informed academically, and you'll see the middle paragraph there, his areas of research are wide-ranging, and I think will be of interest to many of us in the audience today. So please look forward to joining us on February 3rd for that. And now, if I may, give me half a second, and I'm going to play Hildegard's Kyrie.
I'd like to invite everybody to stay on mute now, but when you're done and the music is done, I invite you to take yourself off mute and say thank you and to Matt so he can hear our voices.
Thanks again. marvelous way to end this time. I would just note, first of all, if you're not already, you might want to put yourself in gallery mode so you can see multiples of us, of each other. I've also gotten several inquiries about the recording of this presentation, which, as Gail mentioned at the beginning, if it has been recorded. I believe Gail plans on sending out the link to that probably sometime tomorrow. And it's always available, just like each session we record, we put on the Creation Spirituality Communities has their own channel on YouTube. And on that channel, you'll find a playlist for Creation and Crisis webinars. So you can see past talks there. All right, that's the last of the business that I would have to announce.
Gail, you want to sign us off with the big thank you?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Matt.
Love
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Very nice.
Blessings.
Happy
Epiphany.
Mhm.
Till the next time.
Indeed.
Good
Good
Matt from
Amen.
Ireland.
Okay.
Bye.
More
Good to be with you all. Good to be with you all.
Namaste.
Joy.
Thank you.
Namaste.
Thank you.
Very much from Australia.
Oh.
Wow.
Thank you, Matthew. So beautiful.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Happy New Year to everyone.
Thank you. Nice.
Don't
Thank-
forget the flowers.
Thanks.
Do we have to go?
I do actually. I have to go at a meeting.
Bye.
Bye.
Blessings and thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, Dennis.
Are we staying on at all, Gail?
Am I? I'm here. I'm here.
Yeah. Oh, well, do we need to wrap anything up or are we ready to sign off too? There's
All right.
Marcia.
Yeah, Marcia. Where's Marcia? Is she still there?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, okay.
The whole time.
I saw yours. That's like,
Oh, poor Gail. Poor Gail.
All right. Well, maybe we should just sign off and we'll see you, everybody, as many as can, come next month. It was a great intro to that, Bob. Really nice.
Oh, good. Thank you.
Congratulations to Penny and you all. You did a great job.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Hey, Dennis, good to see you.
Good to see you, Penny.
Yep.
Yeah,
Good to see you.
all right.
Alrighty. Well, I guess we're
Thanks,
we're
Bob.
done. Now go ahead. Oh, absolutely. I'm also going to stop recording. Forgot about that.